This week, I've been contemplating where we left off in the training in Bodhicitta and what it means to actually work with these practices. And the metaphor that is so very useful for me is that of a lighthouse. And let's see if I can. Well, I can't get the full slide, but I think this works just fine. So when we are in samsara, there is always confusion arising. And there's a tendency to think that in some way, our practice is to fix samsara, as opposed to understanding that samsara is confusion. And the practice is a liberation from confusion so we can maintain an unconfused state and in this way benefit others. First, because we have followed the path ourselves, so we have skills to offer. And second, because we can see the different kinds of confusion that beings are suffering, and so we know which teachings are needed at a particular time. But because I live in Maine, I often go to the parks where there are lighthouses and contemplate how lighthouses are beaming out light in the night, beaming out light in the storms, and function as a way to guide people safely to shelter. So even as we are not fully liberated ourselves, to the degree that we have explored our practice, we have the capacity to guide people to refuge, to guide people to a safe harbor, or sentient beings to a safe harbor. And so when we look at the lighthouse and examine it, first, they're built on a very strong foundation. So they are physically unshakable. And we want our heart mind of bodhicitta to be unshakable. And they can withstand any kind of storm. And then if you think of how a lighthouse would be built, you would need lots of help with people of different kinds of skills. You'd need the masons, you'd need the electricians, you'd need the lighthouse keeper in order to bring the lighthouse into function. And then we think of the lighthouse when it's functioning being plugged into a source that's unlimited. So we're not going to worry about is electricity limited or unlimited, but just thinking that the light is produced and it's coming from a source that has, for our purposes in this metaphor, unlimited power. And then the fourth aspect of the lighthouse is that it simply shines. It doesn't shine with any kind of discrimination that this boat is worthy, this boat is unworthy, this boat is filled with desperate migrants that need help, this boat is a yacht of people who are causing suffering, the oligarchs. It simply shines the light without a conceptuality. So I wanted to go into this metaphor as the beginning of our segue into the Tonglen or compassion practice, because the compassion practice begins with flashing on our capacity to have bodhicitta. Our innate capacity that our nature is actually bodhicitta. So if we think of what is the firm foundation that can withstand any storm, the firm foundation is that the nature of mind, the nature of enlightenment, the nature of ultimate reality is absolute bodhicitta. It is this shining wisdom, inseparable from emptiness and inseparable from the state of the four immeasurables: loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. So it's a absolute state, a non-conceptual state, and it's the nature of reality in that it pervades everything, and it is the nature of our minds. Now, we mostly don't experience our minds that way because, due to our own confusion, we're more aware of the confusion than the wisdom. And the practice of the Dharma is learning how to clear away the obstacles to wisdom. And this is an important understanding for our practice. First of all, it is our nature. Bodhicitta is our nature. And when we are doing the practices and we're seeing our limitations, that is success. Because as practitioners, we are learning to clear away the obstacles to our own realization. So we have to be able to see and identify those obstacles. So essentially, in our practice, we're having success after success after success because we're seeing more clearly what is the obstacle and our particular sort of cloudy, dirty, stained window that prevents us from seeing the spaciousness of the great outdoors or our great perfect wisdom. The third point of being, the light being connected to an unlimited source is because we are not separate from the absolute. In our confused state, we don't see the absolute. We are unable to abide in the absolute, but we are never separate from it. And so as we move from conceptually generating bodhicitta by thinking of a memory, by using objects, this suffering being, and opening our hearts to the suffering being, this is a conceptual generation. As that becomes more and more familiar, we get closer and closer to seeing, even if it's only momentary, that we don't need the conceptual situation to generate bodhicitta. We simply allow our minds to relax the idea of separation and connect to the four immeasurables, which are natural aspirations. And in that connection, bodhicitta starts to well up. Pema Chodron uses the idea of a spring. I haven't actually witnessed a spring, but if you've ever been drilling a well, you drill through the hard rock. So we're drilling through the hard rock of our ignorance, and then the water just comes up. As a city person, for me, it's easier to imagine plugging in to the electricity, plugging in a light bulb. It doesn't matter the metaphor. The point is, we are never separate from that absolute, and that absolute pervades our heart mind, and it is unlimited because it is our nature and is the nature of all of reality from the absolute perspective. So this is the view, and the view starts to form the foundation of our practice, and we start to get baby steps towards confidence. So if we think about it, if we think about the prayers that we said this morning, the third prayer is the traditional refuge prayer. And when we contemplate refuge, we might, in our imaginations, think we're taking refuge in the historic Buddha. Or we might think, well, I've met this great Rinpoche, I can take refuge in that great Rinpoche. And the more we study, we start to feel the truth of the different Dharma teachings. So we feel as though we're taking refuge in the Dharma training. And the more we trust the unconfused Sangha, the great Rinpoches, let's say, in our lineage, we have an idea of Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, but the underlying meaning of refuge is it's not the body of the Buddha necessarily, it's not the flesh of the historic being, it's the realization of vast nature of mind that he had. It's not, the different Rinpoches, it's not their personality, it's their realization that we can see manifests as unconditional love. So we might associate that, let's say, with His Eminence Garchen Rinpoche, but it's not his physical presence, it's his embodiment and expression of bodhicitta. So ultimately, we're not taking refuge in anything outside, we're taking refuge in this nature of mind, which is also true for us. So in our culture, because we're so used to self-denigration, it's really hard to take in that we have an innate capacity and we have an innate perfection because we're always focused on our confusion. And this is where we're inviting all the masons and electricians to help us. So we're relying on the teachings that we're receiving, and we're relying on the practices until we're able to have confidence, even if it's only a partial confidence that, yes, we have an innate capacity. And this is actually the reason Buddha nature is taught. It's not taught as a substitute for a soul or an Atman. It's taught as we are inseparable from the absolute, even though we can't see it. So it's more like if we think of the ocean and waves, we're an individual wave, and we think we are separate with our own life, with our concern about our own pollution, like the little fishes that are in our little wave, as opposed to seeing that we have never been separate from the ocean. Our little wave sticks up and we see other waves, and there are storms and all the samsaric confusion that you'd like to imagine. And we see another wave, and so we make a distinction. I am this wave and you are that wave, forgetting or no longer in touch with the absolute of never separate from the ocean. So the view and these wonderful teachings on Buddha nature, that becomes the unshakable foundation. Because it's your nature and because you're practicing, it's inevitable that you will make practice, you will make incremental changes in your heart mind as you practice. And even if even if you only took what you've learned up to this point, you've planted karmic seeds that in future lives will blossom. So there's a process of unfolding that is working within you, even if it doesn't seem accessible day to day. So in the discussion period last time, I was talking about the example of urgency when we were doing the loving kindness practice. And there are many, many variations on these practices. We've been practicing as Lord Jigten Sumgun instructed, contacting bodhicitta and then extending it. And as we extend it, eventually we touch base with friends, enemies, and neutral beings. And our instruction is to see, first of all, what is the conceptually generated felt sense? What is the maximum strength as you understand it on any given day? And then in relation to friends, enemies, and neutral beings, how does it waver and why does it waver? So it's not a inner lack or fault. The whole purpose is to see what's the nature of that wavering, what is the obstacle that prevents you from embodying absolute bodhicitta. So what I'm going to do today is pose a number of contemplations of how you might work with the process as you're seeing, okay, an obstacle is arising, I'm not at full strength, how do I remove that obstacle? And there are many, many instructions on working with the obstacle as it arises. So first, I invite you to touch base with, to the degree that you're able today, that calm, relaxed state of mind that has a quality of loving kindness. And we were connecting to memories of loved ones, of baby animals, in order to generate that felt sense. So again, it's not about the story, it's the felt sense. So let's all connect to that felt sense. And then this morning, I'm going to ask you to visualize, or invite you to visualize either a fairly neutral person, maybe a neighbor you don't know, office worker you don't know, or someone who's mildly irritating, because we want to really see the nature of the obstacle that arises. So as you generate the loving kindness and begin to extend it, looking at hesitation, looking at concern, looking at, depression or feeling unable to extend the full force of your bodhicitta to this person. So in our meditations, then we would start to apply different kinds of questions as to the nature of the wall, and the nature of the wall is always going to be some form of, all right, I've got to go back to protecting myself. This is slightly painful for me, so I want to go back to security. Overwhelming, go back to security. all the different things we might name in many, many ways. Or someone was bringing up the training of a lifeguard, that yes, they can extend a degree, but if it was a choice between two persons, there'd be discrimination with my loved one, save my loved one first. So we're looking at the force, and we're looking at all the different discriminations that arise in our mind. So what we might do in meditation is, instead of the kinds of discrimination that create separation, what is an alternative form of discrimination that creates union? And this is called equalizing self and others. So instead of looking at our differences, we're looking at our sameness. And we could begin with the view: if the nature of sentience, the nature of mind, is Buddha nature, the capacity or the absolute is contained in every form of sentience, and it is not different. So this is often compared to space. So if I look out in my room here, there's space between me and the furthest wall. And if you were to look out in your room, there's space between you and your furthest wall. Space is not different from space. So even though this person is a neutral person or a slightly difficult person, their spark of Buddha nature and your spark of Buddha nature, like space, is absolutely not different. Then if we were to take it further, just like me, the person I'm visualizing has samsaric confusion. I have samsaric confusion. Let's not make distinctions about who's more confused or the kinds of confusion. Space and confusion. Each and every one of us wants not to suffer. Each and every one of us wants peace and a joyful, peaceful mind. We want an inner calm. So visualizing that person, their desire to not suffer and their desire to have happiness is exactly the same as mine. Their desire to protect their children, to have food and shelter, exactly the same as mine. So I invite you to sit with this and go through the steps again: generating bodhicitta, seeing a neutral person that doesn't, let's say, strike the well of depth and urgency, or a slightly difficult person. It can be the one person at the dinner table that always pushes your buttons. How is their Buddha nature different from your Buddha nature? It's pervading. It pervades equally. How is their desire to have happiness and peace of mind different from yours or the same as yours? How is their arising confusion, the fact that it's present, different from your arising confusion as we dwell together in samsara. So we'll sit with this for a good 5 minutes. So going back and forth, generating bodhicitta, meeting an obstacle, asking yourself questions and contemplations. Okay, still keeping this neutral or just slightly triggering person in mind. A companion exercise or a companion way of softening the obstacle, starting to dissolve the obstacle, is called exchanging self for others. So the first exercise was equalizing self and others. The second is exchanging self for others. So generating loving kindness, visualizing the same person that you're not able to hold with the full force of your bodhicitta. As though you're sitting on opposite sides of the table, exchange places with them. And embodying the other person, imagine how that person views you. We have in our relationships the whole history. They did that to me. They hurt my feelings. They were mean, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now we're changing places at the table and looking at ourselves with the eye of that person. Oh, that person has it so easy, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Imagine how you are viewed by that person. You're embodying their hurt, their suffering. And then holding yourself and that person in loving kindness in bodhicitta. So it's as though when we go to the compassion gym, we have all these different machines to work on. So we're allowing a confidence to start to arise that there is an unlimited bodhicitta, that it is our connection to the absolute, and that it is a healing of the separation. And the separation is the layer of conceptuality that in fact creates the separation. you are not safe, or you hurt me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I need to protect me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so our capacity, the ideal that I was expressing earlier as the lighthouse, is just simply the light shining. And we start to see that the obstacle between that just abiding in the bodhicitta that is radiating out in all directions is layers and layers of conceptuality, creating a need for security of some kind, and layers and layers of discrimination about why one can't fully open one's heart and mind. And again, we're doing this in the safety of our meditation cushion. We're not trying to progress beyond our own capacity. We're working in this particular condition of opening our heart mind without incurring, let's say, without encountering harm. And this is also really an important understanding, because if we try and go too fast with bodhicitta, let's say if we went, instead of a neutral person or a slightly irritable person, instead of visualizing that, the most difficult person in your life, we might shut down and give up. You know, it's too hard, I don't want anything to do with it. Or if we were to, go out in public and, in a place where there was actual potential physical harm, this wide open, before we had the capacity to be inseparable from the absolute, again, we might shut down and say, I'm not going to try this, I can't do it, I don't want anything to do with it. So we are looking at, how does our mind create obstacles? How does our mind waver in strength and urgency? And how does it do that in relation to our imagination creating the idea of different family members or people in front of us? And working with that for the purpose of seeing our limitations. And as we get more and more capacity, and as we're more and more connected to the absolute, then we have more skills and training to maintain this full force wherever we are, no matter what kind of danger we might be in. And we look at the old stories for the folks who had developed that capacity. So I'm just going to give one more example to see how much of what we experience is artificially constructed. So again, I'm going back to, the very honest reflection that someone made last week. If there were two people drowning in the water and one was my grandchild, I'd save my grandchild first. How human, how, we would all relate to that. To see how we construct that, however, imagine you're going to the pet shelter and you're walking into the pet shelter, and first you just see a room full of dogs and cats. Then you create a connection to one of the animals, you bring that dog home, and all of a sudden that is my dog, my precious fur ball, my family that I would, do everything I can to make happy. So on the one hand, we're seeing how these attachments create different layers of walls of being fully open-hearted. And if we were to look at our lives and to look at all the times we've suffered, all our suffering is when we turn inward towards life isn't going the way I want it to go. I feel hurt by this. I feel threatened by this. They're not being nice to me. I don't want, this medical diagnosis. All of our suffering has to do with our relationship of a constructed separate self that we want to have peace and happiness. And then if we look at the times of joy in our life, it's when we let that armor drop and we're like the lighthouse shining out, even if it's only momentary.